Why do conversations so often feel like battlegrounds instead of bridges? Why do simple discussions spiral into debates? And why does winning an argument so often feel like losing? Communication is supposed to connect us, yet more often than not, it divides. Words become weapons, silence turns into tension, and before we know it, we're caught in a cycle of misinterpretations, defensiveness, and frustration. But what if the problem isn't what we're saying, but how we're saying it? In the next conversation, Jefferson Fisher pulls back the curtain on something shocking. Most of us have been arguing all wrong. We think that clarity wins, that logic convinces, that the loudest voice dominates. But the truth, people don't listen because they understand. They listen because they feel understood. Think about it. Have you ever watched two people argue, whether in politics, relationships, or even over something as trivial as what restaurant to eat at, and noticed that neither side is actually listening? They're just waiting for their turn to speak. They're rehearsing their counterpoints while the other person is talking. They're locked in a tug-of-war where the goal isn't connection, but control. Fisher's insights flip this on its head. He doesn't just teach you how to talk, he teaches you how to disarm, how to diffuse, how to steer a conversation instead of sinking in it. His lessons aren't about winning arguments, they're about winning trust, influence, and clarity. And the most surprising part, the most powerful tactics aren't aggressive or assertive. They're subtle, counterintuitive, and in some cases, almost invisible. They involve things like the way you pause, the way you soften your tone, the way you respond when someone is raising their voice at you. We are obsessed with words. We scrutinize them, dissect them, weaponize them. We act as if the right words, spoken in the right order, will unlock understanding like a magic spell. But if words alone carried the weight of communication, then why do people misunderstand each other so often? Why do two people hear the same sentence and walk away with completely different interpretations? The truth is, words are the least important part of how we communicate. They are the surface layer, the visible part of an iceberg, while the real meaning, the force that drives whether a conversation succeeds or crumbles, lies beneath, in tone, in delivery, in the invisible energy exchanged between two people. Consider a simple phrase, "I'm fine." These two words, stripped of context, appear neutral, but say them with a sharp, clipped tone and they become a warning shot. Stretch them out with a weary sigh and they carry exhaustion, even quiet resentment. Whisper them and they feel secretive. Laugh while saying them and they dismiss a problem before it can be acknowledged. The same words, different delivery, completely different messages. This is why people in arguments rarely remember what was said, only how it made them feel. A single, miscalibrated tone can turn an innocent question into an accusation. A poorly timed pause can make a compliment sound insincere. A phrase that should be reassuring can come off as condescending simply because it was spoken too slowly or with the wrong emphasis. Think of great communicators, not just famous speakers, but people in your own life who seem to command attention effortlessly. They are not necessarily the ones with the biggest vocabularies or the most eloquent phrasing. They are the ones who control their tone like a musician playing an instrument, adjusting it to the emotional rhythm of the conversation. They make people feel heard, not just spoken to. On the flip side, think about the last time you got into an argument that spiraled out of control. Chances are, the problem wasn't that the other person didn't understand your words. It was that they didn't trust your intent. And intent is not carried in words, it is carried in delivery. So if words are not the problem, what is? Lack of awareness. Most people speak without thinking about how their voice, pacing, and body language shape their message. They focus on what they're saying instead of how it's landing. They assume that being technically right is enough, forgetting that logic means nothing if the delivery puts the listener on the defensive. Want to change the way you communicate instantly? Start focusing less on the words themselves and more on their weight. Pay attention to your tone. Match your pacing to the emotional state of the person you're speaking to. If someone is upset, slow down instead of speeding up. If someone is hesitant, soften your voice instead of sharpening it. If someone is defensive, lower your volume instead of raising it. Control how you say something and you control how it is received. And in the end, that is the real key to conversation, not the words themselves, but the unspoken language wrapped around them. We like to think that arguments are about facts, if we could just present the right information, the other person would finally see the light. We treat debates like a courtroom, believing that logic is the deciding factor, that evidence is the ultimate weapon. But if that were true, why do so many arguments escalate even when both sides have all the facts? Why do people double down instead of backing down when confronted with irrefutable proof? Because arguments are not about facts, they are about feelings. The human brain does not process information in a vacuum. It filters everything through emotion first. Before we analyze a statement intellectually, we react to it emotionally. Do I feel attacked? Do I feel respected? Do I feel heard? These subconscious judgments happen in milliseconds, shaping whether we engage with an open mind or shut down in defense. Imagine you're in a disagreement with a friend over something small. Let's say you were supposed to meet at a certain time, but they misunderstood and showed up an hour late. You're frustrated and you tell them, "You're always late, you never respect my time." At this moment, your friend has two choices: to address the content of your words, the fact that they were late, or to react to the accusation embedded in your tone: you never respect my time. 9 times out of 10, they will choose the latter. They won't argue about the time on the clock. They'll argue about the implication that they don't respect you. Their response will likely be defensive. That's not true. I do respect your time. You always exaggerate. And just like that, the argument has shifted from the original issue to a battle over personal character. Now imagine the same situation, but instead of attacking, you say, I felt really disrespected when you were late today. It made me feel like my time didn't matter. This statement still communicates frustration, but it doesn't trigger a defensive reaction. It focuses on how you felt, not on what the other person did wrong. Instead of making them prove their worth, it invites them to understand your perspective. This is the fundamental misunderstanding that causes most arguments to spiral. People believe they're arguing about facts, when in reality they are arguing about identity, trust, and emotional validation. The moment a conversation makes someone feel judged, attacked, or unimportant, they stop processing logic. They move from reasoning to self-protection. Think about a political debate: two people, both armed with statistics, shouting past each other. Neither side is willing to budge, not because they don't understand the data, but because admitting they're wrong would mean challenging their worldview, the very foundation of their identity. And when identity is at stake, emotions override logic every time. This is why bombarding people with facts rarely changes their minds. Have you ever tried to convince someone they were wrong by pulling up Google and showing them an article? Did they suddenly say, oh wow, I was wrong, thank you for proving it? Probably not. Instead, they likely dismissed the source, changed the subject, or became even more convinced of their position. Because facts don't persuade people, trust does. And trust is built through emotional safety, not intellectual superiority. So how do you win an argument? You don't, you dissolve it. You shift your focus from proving a point to making the other person feel understood. When emotions calm, the mind opens. When someone doesn't feel threatened, they are more likely to consider another perspective. The next time you find yourself in a heated debate, stop trying to be right and start making the other person feel heard. Say things like, I get why you feel that way. That makes sense from your perspective. I see what you mean. These aren't admissions of defeat. They're invitations to a real conversation. And in the end, isn't that what we really want? Not to win, but to be understood. Most people listen to respond, not to understand. In conversations, especially heated ones, our minds work like defense attorneys, scrambling to build a counterargument before the other person even finishes speaking. We assume that if we just present our case clearly enough, we'll convince them to see things our way. But this rarely happens. Instead, the conversation turns into a tug-of-war, with both sides digging in, neither willing to budge. This is where the tell me more trick changes everything. It is deceptively simple but incredibly powerful. When someone is emotional, defensive, or pushing their point aggressively, instead of arguing back, you say, tell me more. That's it, 3 words, and yet they have the power to diffuse tension, shift the dynamic, and open up real dialogue. Why does this work? Because at the core of every argument, beneath the frustration and raised voices, is an unspoken desire, the need to be heard. People don't argue because they love conflict. They argue because they feel unseen, misunderstood, or dismissed, and nothing fuels anger like the feeling that the other person isn't really listening. Imagine you're in a disagreement with a coworker who says, I'm tired of doing all the work while no one else pulls their weight. Your instinct might be to defend yourself. That's not true, I do plenty of work. But the moment you say that, you invalidate their experience. They don't feel heard, so they double down. No, you do. I'm always the one staying late while you clock out on time. And now, instead of resolving the issue, you're trapped in a battle of who works harder. But what happens if, instead of defending yourself, you say, tell me more about that? Everything changes. The other person expects pushback, but instead they're given an open door. Now, instead of fighting for your turn to speak, you've invited them to keep going, and in doing so, they often reveal what's really bothering them. Maybe they're overwhelmed because they feel like their efforts go unnoticed. Maybe they're stressed about something unrelated and work is just the easiest place to vent. Maybe they're projecting frustration about something deeper. But now, instead of being opponents, you're allies in uncovering the root of the problem. The brilliance of Tell Me More is that it forces a person to slow down. When people are upset, their words come fast, their emotions even faster. They often say things they don't fully mean, exaggerate their grievances, or mix unrelated frustrations together. But when you say tell me more, you force them to clarify their thoughts, and in the process, they often soften their stance because now they're hearing themselves too. This technique is especially effective in personal relationships. Imagine a partner saying, you never listen to me. The natural reaction might be, that's not true, I listen all the time. But instead, saying tell me more shifts the conversation. Now they get the chance to explain what they really mean. Maybe they feel dismissed when they talk about their day. Maybe they feel like their concerns aren't taken seriously. Maybe what they're asking for isn't agreement, but presence. And now, instead of arguing, you're getting to the heart of the issue. Good conversation isn't about talking more, it's about listening better. Tell me more isn't just a phrase, it's a strategy for disarming defensiveness and uncovering truth. It works in boardrooms, in friendships, in marriages, in moments of conflict with complete strangers, because when people feel heard, they no longer need to fight for their voice. Silence is uncomfortable. We rush to fill it, afraid that a moment without words will make us look uncertain, weak, or unintelligent. In arguments especially, we feel the pressure to respond immediately, as if the faster we reply, the stronger our position. But in reality, speed isn't power, control is, and nothing commands a conversation more than the ability to pause. The pause is a secret weapon. It breaks patterns, disrupts emotional momentum, and forces the other person to sit with their own words. It can de-escalate a heated argument, make your words land with greater impact, and even shift the entire dynamic of a conversation without you having to say anything at all. Imagine you're in a tense discussion and someone says something designed to provoke you. Maybe they call you out unfairly in a meeting or make a passive-aggressive comment at the dinner table. Your instinct might be to fire back, to immediately correct them or defend yourself. But what happens if you just pause? You look at them, you breathe, you let a few beats of silence pass before you respond. That pause does something psychological. It creates discomfort, not for you but for them, because now they are left to sit with their own words. Their statement, which may have been thrown out impulsively, now hangs in the air, weightier than they intended. Without immediate pushback, they are forced to reflect on what they just said. And more often than not, you'll see a shift, a flicker of uncertainty, a moment where they backpedal, soften, or even correct themselves. Pausing also works when you are the one feeling emotional. When anger, frustration, or defensiveness bubbles up, the worst thing you can do is speak while in that state. The moment you start talking, your emotions take control of your words, and once they're out, you can't take them back. A well-timed pause is the difference between reacting and responding. It gives you the chance to choose your words instead of letting your emotions choose them for you. Consider great speakers, the ones who captivate audiences, who hold attention not just with what they say, but with how they say it. Watch closely and you'll notice something. They pause. Right before a key point, they let silence build anticipation. After making a powerful statement, they stop, allowing the weight of their words to settle before moving on. It's not an accident, they understand that silence makes people line in. In everyday conversations, pausing also signals confidence. When someone speaks quickly, filling every gap with words, it often comes across as nervousness. But when someone pauses, taking their time before responding, it conveys control. It shows that they are not rushing to prove themselves, that they are deliberate, that they are comfortable with silence. And in turn, people instinctively respect that presence. One of the most powerful ways to use the pause is during negotiations or difficult discussions. Say you're discussing a salary with an employer. You state your number. They counter with something lower. Instead of immediately responding, you pause. You let the silence stretch just long enough for them to start second-guessing their offer. In many cases, they will fill the silence themselves, sometimes even by offering a better deal. This technique is also used in journalism. Skilled interviewers don't always jump in with the next question. Instead, when a subject finishes speaking, they leave a moment of silence. And what often happens, the person they're interviewing rushes to fill the gap, offering more details, revealing more than they originally intended. The pause becomes a tool of extraction. Pausing isn't weakness, it isn't hesitation, it is controlled restraint. It is the difference between reacting impulsively and responding intelligently. So the next time you find yourself in a difficult conversation, resist the urge to fill every space. Let the silence breathe, hold the pause, watch how the other person shifts, watch how the energy changes. And most importantly, watch how much more power you gain, not by saying more, but by mastering when to say nothing at all. We are conditioned to believe that conversations, especially disagreements, are battles to be won. We see arguments as competitions where the goal is not just to be right, but to make the other person admit they're wrong. We enter discussions armed with facts, ready to defend our position, convinced that if we push hard enough, the other person will concede. But here's the truth: you don't have to win every conversation. In fact, trying to do so often ensures that you lose, not the argument itself, but something far more important: relationships, respect, and influence. Think about the last time someone aggressively tried to prove you wrong. Did you genuinely reconsider your perspective, or did you dig in deeper? Most people, when confronted with forceful opposition, don't back down, they double down. When someone feels pressured to surrender, their instinct is to defend, not to reflect. Winning the argument often comes at the cost of alienating the person you're talking to. Now imagine you're in a heated discussion with a friend about a political issue. You have the facts on your side. You know their argument has flaws. You present your case logically, but instead of considering your points, they become more defensive. They interrupt, they resist, and before long you're both just talking at each other. The conversation has stopped being about truth and has become a struggle for dominance. Even if you win by forcing them into silence, what have you really gained? Most arguments are not won by overpowering the other person's logic. They are lost by damaging the emotional dynamic of the conversation. The real question to ask yourself is, what is your actual goal? Do you want to prove a point, or do you want to preserve a relationship? Do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective? Because those are not always the same thing. The most skilled communicators understand that not every disagreement needs a resolution, and not every point needs to be made. They choose their battles. They know that some conversations are best left open-ended, that sometimes the wisest thing you can do is let someone walk away still believing what they believe, not because you're conceding defeat, but because forcing understanding is impossible. In business, this is the difference between closing a deal and losing a client. Imagine a negotiation where you argue every tiny detail, determined to get the upper hand in every clause. You may win the negotiation, but at what cost? You leave the other party feeling resentful, like they were pressured into a deal they didn't truly want. The result, they may never want to work with you again. You won, but you lost something much bigger: trust, goodwill, and long-term collaboration. In relationships, trying to win every conversation leads to exhaustion. If every disagreement becomes a courtroom debate, people start walking on eggshells. Instead of talking openly, they withdraw because they know every discussion is just another battle waiting to happen, and nothing erodes intimacy faster than the fear of constant conflict. So how do you apply this? You learn to let go. You recognize when pushing further is counterproductive. You ask yourself, is this worth it? Will Oving my point strengthen this relationship, or will it create unnecessary tension? Will winning this argument change anything, or will it just give me a temporary sense of victory? Sometimes the best move isn't to keep talking, it's to pause, to let the other person hold their perspective, and to walk away with your peace intact. Because the most powerful communicators don't need to win every conversation. They know that the true mark of influence isn't forcing someone to agree with you, it's creating an environment where they feel safe enough to think for themselves. Emotions hijack conversations. In the heat of an argument, our brain switches from rational thinking to survival mode. We react instead of responding, blurting out things we later regret, escalating tension without meaning to. And once words leave our mouths, they can't be taken back. But there's a simple technique that can prevent this: the 3-second reset rule. It works like this: before responding in a tense conversation, pause for 3 seconds, just 3 seconds. That small gap of time creates a psychological buffer between impulse and intention. It shifts your brain from reaction to control. Why does this work? Because the first thing you want to say in an argument is almost never the smartest thing to say. It's usually defensive, emotional, or sarcastic. It's the knee-jerk reaction that escalates the situation instead of diffusing it. But when you give yourself 3 seconds, something happens: you reclaim control. Picture this: you're in a heated discussion with a coworker. They say something dismissive, something that feels like a direct attack on your competence. Your instinct: fire back, say something sharp, prove them wrong. But before you do, you take that 3-second pause. In that pause, your brain recalibrates. Your initial response, probably defensive or aggressive, shifts. You have just enough time to ask yourself, what outcome do I actually want here? Do I want to prove a point, or do I want a productive conversation? Do I want to vent my frustration, or do I want to steer this discussion toward resolution? Those 3 seconds can be the difference between a conversation that spirals into conflict and one that leads to understanding. This rule isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about channeling it. The pause doesn't erase your feelings, it gives you space to process them before they dictate your words. Athletes do this instinctively. In high-pressure moments, like a basketball player at the free throw line or a golfer about to sink a putt, they pause, they reset, because they know that acting on adrenaline alone leads to sloppy mistakes. The same is true in conversation. The 3-second reset rule is especially useful in personal relationships. Think about arguments with a partner where emotions flare up quickly. A single impulsive comment can turn a small disagreement into an all-out fight, but when you pause just for 3 seconds, you create space to choose a response that de-escalates instead of inflames. Here's an easy way to practice. The next time someone says something that triggers you, inhale through your nose and exhale slowly before responding. Not an exaggerated sigh, not a dramatic pause, just a subtle, controlled breath. That tiny act of mindfulness gives you just enough time to break the automatic cycle of reaction. People think power in a conversation comes from dominating, from speaking faster, from always having a response ready. But real power, it's in control, and nothing gives you control faster than a simple, intentional pause. Master the 3-second reset, and you'll find that the conversations you once dreaded, the ones that used to spiral out of control, suddenly become manageable. You'll stop saying things you regret. You'll start steering discussions instead of being swept away by them. And most importantly, you'll become the kind of person who is impossible to provoke, because when you control your reactions, you control the entire conversation. Every conversation has a temperature. Some are warm and inviting, making people feel safe and understood. Others are ice-cold, distant, dismissive, tense. And then there are the ones that burn too hot, where emotions flare, voices rise, and logic evaporates under the heat of frustration. Most people don't realize that they have the power to control this temperature. They assume that conversations take on a life of their own, that emotions dictate the direction. But in reality, the person with the most control isn't the loudest or the most aggressive, it's the one who regulates the emotional climate. Think of it like this: if someone walks into a room and starts yelling, what happens? The instinctive response is to match their energy, to get louder, more defensive, more reactive. The temperature spikes, but if someone remains calm in the face of that intensity, something shifts. The contrast between their composure and the other person's chaos creates an imbalance. Person yelling either looks unreasonable or, more often, is forced to adjust their energy. This is the key: be the thermostat, not the thermometer. A thermometer simply reacts to the environment. It rises when things get hot, drops when things get cold. But a thermostat sets the temperature. It dictates the emotional tone rather than being controlled by it. And the most effective communicators understand how to use this principle to guide conversations, rather than being dragged into emotional chaos. How to control the temperature in a heated conversation. Lower your volume instead of raising it. If someone gets loud, the natural response is to meet their intensity. But doing the opposite, lowering your voice, forces the other person to adjust. Humans mirror each other's energy unconsciously. When you stay calm, you become an anchor. The other person, whether they realize it or not, will start to settle. Slow down instead of speeding up. When people argue, they talk fast. Their words tumble out as they rush to defend themselves, explain, prove a point. But if you deliberately slow your speech, it changes the pace of the interaction. It signals confidence. It forces the other person to actually process what's being said rather than just reacting. It makes your words land. Use silence as a tool. When tension is high, we instinctively fill space with words, apologies, justifications, counterpoints. But silence can be more powerful than any argument. A well-placed pause makes people rethink what they just said. It creates a moment where emotions can settle instead of escalating. Acknowledge emotion before addressing logic. If someone is upset, facts alone won't reach them. They need to feel understood before they can process information. A simple acknowledgement, "I can see why you're frustrated," or "that sounds really stressful," acts as a pressure release valve. It lowers their defenses so that the conversation can actually move forward. Exit the power struggle. Many arguments spiral because both people feel the need to win. But here's the truth: you don't have to play the game. If someone is pushing you into a battle of egos, don't engage. Shift the focus from proving a point to creating understanding. Say something unexpected, "You might be right," or "I see your perspective," and watch how it disarms them. Real-world example: diffusing an argument in seconds. Imagine you're in a disagreement with a partner. They're upset, their voice is rising, they're accusing you of never listening. The instinct is to defend yourself, to correct them, to explain why they're wrong. But instead, you lower your voice, you slow your words, you pause before responding. And then you say, "I don't want to argue with you. I care about what you're saying. Tell me what's really bothering you." The entire conversation shifts. The heat of the argument drops, because instead of fueling the fire, you've removed the oxygen. You've controlled the temperature. The strongest person in a conversation is not the one who dominates, but the one who regulates. The one who can remain calm when others are agitated, who can slow down when others speed up, who can lower the emotional temperature instead of reacting to it. Master this skill and you will find that difficult conversations no longer control you, you control them. You will be able to diffuse tension in seconds, navigate conflict with ease, and leave every discussion not with frustration, but with clarity and influence. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more insights.